Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different from my usual ones. With the NBA Finals around the corner, I wanted to release a video on one of my favorite NBA video games of all time, NBA Jam. It's a change of pace from my usual videos, but hopefully you'll enjoy it regardless. I had a ton of fun making it and hopefully it's an enjoyable viewing experience as well. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. With one of the most recognizable theme songs in sports video game history, NBA Jam was a first of its kind both as one of the first real playable basketball arcade games, as well as one of the first sports games to feature NBA licensed teams, players, and their likenesses. From gravity and physics-defying jumps, dunks, and animations to the classic "he's on fire" mechanic, NBA Jam was a huge success on the arcade scene. So successful, in fact, that the game was ported to the various consoles of the time over the next few years, including, among others, the Sega Genesis and Saturn, original PlayStation, Atari Jaguar, and the focus of this tier list, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or better known as the SNES. A number of iterations were released over the years as well, including the well-known NBA Jam Tournament Edition, as well as a number of NBA Jams released from 1999 to 2003 until Acclaim went defunct. Some of you may also remember the last installment released by EA Sports in 2011, the On Fire Edition, which was released for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and also notably on mobile. None of these later iterations, however, really compared to the originals. Which brings us back to the focus of this tier list, the 1993 release of NBA Jam for the SNES, which was one of the games I grew up playing on my dad's SNES, along with classics like F-Zero, Pitfall, the infamously difficult Star Wars original trilogy games, and the just as difficult Disney games Aladdin and The Lion King. Maybe one day I'll make videos on those games as well, but the focus here is on these 54 players from the 27 teams of the 1993-94 season, so let's get started with our first team, the Golden State Warriors. Much like today's Golden State Warriors, Tim Hardaway and Chris Mullin are very proficient from three. Looking at Hardaway, he's a small guard who matches up nicely against the other good small guards in the game. His major downside, which will become a bit of a theme with most of the small guards, is that he doesn't really dunk and is prone to getting knocked off the ball by larger defenders. Chris Mullin also doesn't dunk much and he's not particularly fast, but he more than makes up for it in his three-point shooting. He does not miss when he's wide open, and when you're going up against the computer, you can definitely shoot them out of the gym. His lack of speed and below-average defense might be a little more problematic against teams like the Hawks, Bulls, and Hornets who have fast forwards, but regardless of whether you're taking on the CPU or a person, you've definitely got more than a fighting chance with either player. And for that, the Golden State Warriors will be our first team in A tier. Next up, we have the Houston Rockets with Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon and Vernon Maxwell. This is one of the teams you choose if your sole purpose in the game is to get a backboard-shattering dunk and try and outshove your opponent to win. Hakeem is a terrific defender and is more than capable of bringing the house down, but he's just a tad too slow to be a primary ball handler against teams using fast guards and can get both pickpocketed and pushed off the ball easily. Vernon Maxwell is an above-average three-point shooter. There's plenty of teams that have a guy with his speed and shooting but better dunks and defense. You can probably win dunk-offs with Hakeem, but the Rockets definitely wouldn't be my first choice when playing a buddy, placing them solidly in the B tier. To Minnesota we go with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Where do I even begin? I guess I'll start by saying they're one of the most frustrating teams to play with. You've got second-year Christian Laettner, who really isn't that good at anything. He's not fast, doesn't consistently hit threes, often flunks dunks, and you're not choosing him for his defense either. And while Chuck Person is certainly better, you're not going to take him over guys like Reggie Miller or even James Worthy. Sure, he's got some cool dunks, but Dominique Wilkins and Sean Kemp have cooler. Long story short, the old logo is great, but this team is trash. Easy D tier. Now let's look at the San Antonio Spurs, who have arguably one of the coolest retro logos in the history of the NBA. And I loved what the Spurs did recently with the Fiesta City Edition jerseys. Straight heat. Starting with Hall of Famer David Robinson, you've basically got Hakeem Olajuwon, but he just might hit 3 once a game. That's not a knock by any means, as Robinson will keep you competitive, but his dunk package isn't nearly as cool. Looking at his teammate Sean Elliott, and you've got a very consistent three-dimensional player. He's got very good three-point shooting, solid dunking ability, he's fast enough to keep pace with almost every player in the game. His defense isn't that good, but you're going to be extremely competitive regardless of which player you choose, regardless of the opponent, and for that, the Spurs will join the Warriors in A tier. Another team with banger retro jerseys that were admirably brought back recently, Karl Malone and John Stockton formed one of the NBA's more formidable duos of the late 80s and early 90s, and their attributes in the game certainly reflect that. Karl Malone is essentially David Robinson, but with maxed out dunks instead of defense, and more than holds his own against the other big men of the game. Then you've got the NBA's career leader in assists and steals in John Stockton, who also matches up with the game's best guards. You'd like to see his three-point maxed out, but he's extremely consistent and can be a defensive pest. No matter which player you choose, you're going to have a chance to both win and have fun, making the Utah Jazz an easy A tier. When you think of the NBA's best dunkers over the years, you'd be remiss to leave Dominique Wilkins off that list, and he's just as electric in the game. He's a little slower than you'd like, but you're a near guarantee to break a backboard when you play with him. Stacey Augmon is no scrub either. He outpaces the game's centers, giving you an advantage in those types of matchups, and he knocks down threes more consistently than you'd guess based off his attributes. He's by no means a high flyer like Dominique, but he's sneakily one of the better all-around players the game has to offer. But let's be real. If you're choosing the Hawks, you want to dunk with Dominique, and unfortunately, there's other teams with guys that do what he does, but even better. And for those reasons, the Hawks slide in respectably at B tier. Another team with great retro jerseys and a team to match, the Charlotte Hornets are, I think, one of the best teams in the game. If Scottie Pippen wasn't in the game, Alonzo Mourning would comfortably be the best player in the game. This dude can literally do it all and can match up with any player in the game. You want to dunk off, he's more than capable of some highlights. You need a timely three, he'll hit it. You want to bully smaller players and centers with subpar handles, he can do that too. And this is all without mentioning teammate Larry Johnson, who is nearly just as good, but sacrifices defense for dunks. I don't know how respected the Hornets were at the time the game came out, but if they didn't get it then, they're certainly getting it now. You can beat any team using either player, and they're fun to play with. The Hornets are easily an S tier. Michael Jordan does not feature in this game, but that doesn't stop the Bulls from having the best player in the game. Scottie Pippen does everything Alonzo Mourning does, but even better, and you can practically take everything I said about Alonzo and multiply it by 5. Scottie is easily this game's cheat code, a matchup nightmare for CPUs and mere mortals alike, and is probably one of the better NBA video game players of all time. Horace Grant is no scrub either and gives you a formidable defensive-minded teammate who can flush it as well. There's no doubt about it, you're choosing the Bulls to play as Scottie, you can single-handedly beat any team you face with him. As much as I don't like the Bulls as a Pistons fan myself, I've got to give credit where credit's due, and the Chicago Bulls easily join the Hornets in S tier. We've had a pretty solid run of really good teams for quite a while, but that run ends here with Cleveland. Don't get me wrong, Mark Price and Brad Daugherty are good players, but there are so many players in the game who do what they do but better. There's no reason to pick Mark Price over Isaiah Thomas or John Stockton. There's no reason to take Brad over Ewing, Malone, Olajuwon, or Robinson. Sure, you'll be mostly competitive, but you're going to be at a disadvantage against the game's top teams. There's just really no reason to choose them unless you're a Cavs fan. So allow me to let you in on a little bit of a secret. There's actually 3 C's in Cleveland Cavaliers, and that third C stands for C tier. 2 guys that probably made a lot more enemies than they did friends, Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer, are next on the list from your Bad Boys Detroit Pistons. And just as you hated playing them in the 80s and 90s, you hated going up against them here too. Zeke is the game's best point guard by far, and that's not just my bias talking. He's a sniper from 3, a defensive pest, and is one of the only 2 players in the game with maxed out speed. He might not be able to dunk, but unless he's blocked, he's never going to miss from up close. Bill Laimbeer is okay. There's certainly better big men in the game to choose from. You're not playing with the Pistons to play with Bill, though, but he's a useful teammate. As much as I'd love to put them in S tier, Zeke just isn't tall enough and you lose a little bit of the fun factor of playing NBA Jam when you can't jam, but they're more than worthy of belonging in A tier. The Indiana Pacers, led by Reggie Miller, come in next on the tier list, and just like Tayshaun Prince's chase down block in Game 2 of the 2004 Eastern Conference Finals, it's bad news for Pacers fans. Unfortunately, Reggie just doesn't match up against the game's premier number 1 options. He's got some nice dunks and good speed, but he just isn't worth choosing over some of the guys mentioned previously in this list. Derek McKee provides next to nothing as a second option, and overall, the Pacers are just kinda meh. In fact, the Pacers are the only team I lost with throughout my entire playthrough of beating every team. I've lost twice. Indiana is another team that you're not choosing unless you're a fan, and the Pacers find themselves in C tier with Cleveland. To the City of Angels we go with our next team in the tier list with Danny Manning and Ron Harper of the LA Clippers. Although Danny Manning is basically just a slightly worse Reggie Miller, Ron Harper is quietly one of the more solid players in the game. He's not going to wow you with dunks, but his speed and three-point shooting can be problematic in the right matchups. He's also more than capable of knocking players off the ball with his plus defensive stats. The Clippers are a team that can handle the weaker teams in the game with ease and can be competitive in most of the good ones provided you play with Harper. This one might be a bit of a surprise, but I think Clip City Chip City are worth a B tier slot. Make no mistake about it, the Milwaukee Bucks are arguably the worst team in the game. Brad Lohaus might have plus 3-point shooting, but he's so slow and poor with the ball that you're rarely able to get an open look off anyway. Blue Edwards has a cool name, but you have no reason to pick him for his dunks over really anyone else in the game. Don't let these clips and the final stats fool you. You're at a matchup disadvantage in almost, if not all, matchups. They're just really not fun whatsoever to play with. F's in the chat for Milwaukee, they're going into F tier. The Boston Celtics may have a storied franchise, but that doesn't translate to NBA Jam, unfortunately. Nobody's trying to run duos with Robert Parrish, as great a defender as he is, and even though D. Brown is a high-flying small guard, Celtics really don't do much else, and there's no reason to play as them unless you want to change things up, dunk with a point guard. Heck, if D. Brown wasn't so good at dunking, they'd be looking at F tier easily. There's an argument to be made for putting them in D tier too, but since I think they can match up with the other teams in C tier, that's where I'm going to put them. At least you guys have the NBA Finals, Celtics fans. Next up, coincidentally, is the Celtics Eastern Conference Finals opponent for this year, the Miami Heat. While Ronnie Cycli and Harold Miner are great defenders and prolific dunkers with glass-shattering potential, they're astronomically slow, poor ball handlers, and are simply outclassed by the large majority of teams in this game. Unless you're trying to challenge yourself, you've really got no business choosing them as your team. Cheer up, Timberwolves fans, because you're no longer alone, as you've got company in D tier. Next up, we've got the New Jersey, and yes, I do mean the New Jersey Nets, featuring 1991st overall pick Derek Coleman and teammate Kenny Anderson. And much like Coleman's NBA career, this team leaves a lot to be desired. Coleman has some cool dunks, but his defense is trash, and he's not particularly fast either. Anderson is a decent three-point shooter, but there's so many other small players in the game that shoot threes well, they're much better than Anderson at doing so. Similarly to the Celtics, the only reason they're not in F tier is because Coleman is a good enough dunker to keep them out of it. Not by much, and that's a go in D tier. After a streak of some rather lousy duos, the New York Knicks are up next to break the cold spell. Patrick Ewing is a monster in this game and is more than capable of soloing just about every matchup. He's a bully, he's got good dunks, and he's quick too. He's also more of a threat from three than all of the other prior elite big men we've seen so far. Not to mention, John Starks is a very prolific second option and someone who knocks down open threes and also plays solid defense. However, just like real life, the Knicks just aren't quite good enough to be considered best of the best. If Ewing shot the three a little better, if Starks was a little faster, they'd be an easy S tier. Just like the 93-94 season for which this game was released, the Knicks fall just short of glory, but a respectable A tier. Astute observers will notice a significant change from the arcade version of this game as Nick Anderson replaces Shaquille O'Neal for the Orlando Magic. Make no mistake about it, the Magic are still a very good team as Anderson makes up in speed what he slightly lacks in defense. But just like Shaq, he's more than capable of bringing down the backboard. Keeping with the trend of small point guards, Scott Skiles is a dead-eye from three, easily keeps up with the game's fastest players. You can win games with either of these players, and very rarely will you be at a matchup disadvantage. Very easy decision to be made here. The Magic belong comfortably in A tier. The name of the game is NBA Jam, but unfortunately for 76ers fans, neither Clarence Weatherspoon or Jeff Hornacek are very prolific dunkers. They are not bums by any means, but there's really no reason to choose either of them in a given matchup. Although they're both plus 3-point shooters with good speed, they're really just not that fun to play with. And I know the score looks pretty lopsided here, but the Bullets are not a very good team, and I managed to get on fire a couple times to really stretch the lead. Maybe if one of them had max 3-point stats, it would make a difference. The 76ers, unfortunately, are a 500 type of team. You all know what letter grade goes with average, and that's C. The 76ers go in C tier. The Washington Bullets are next on our list, and for a second you may have done a double take and question why Horace Grant is on two teams. But not to fear basketball fans, that is actually Horace's brother Harvey. He's got very good speed for a big man, and I'm not gonna lie, his dunk package is pretty nasty. However, there really isn't much positive to say for his teammate Tom Gugliotta. With all due respect to his defense, the name of the game is NBA Jam, not NBA Defense. They may look good in the clips I took, but keep in mind this was against the F-tier Bucks and they just kept throwing the ball to me. I would have put the Bullets in C tier if Harvey could have busted the backboard, but I guess glass is stronger than bullets, and for that Washington ultimately ends up in D tier. Back to Los Angeles we go, but unfortunately the Showtime Lakers are no longer. The Lakers are not a bad team, but you do wonder what they could have looked like had NBA Jam been released just 3 years earlier. Big Game James certainly lives up to the hype with his high-flying brim shakers and decent three-point shooting abilities, but Vlade Divac just isn't that viable number 2 option, as he's got average or below average attributes in all 4 categories. The Lakers are dangerously close to a C-tier team, but looking at the other teams there, I just don't think it'd be fair to place them there, so the Lakers barely squeak into B tier. Sir Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns are the next team on the list, and man, is Sir Charles just as fun to play with as he is to watch on TV. He's got glass-shattering dunks, great speed for a big man, and is more than capable of hitting open threes. It doesn't particularly matter that teammate Kevin Johnson doesn't really do anything special and just kind of exists, because Barkley is a one-man wrecking crew. Perhaps I'm a little biased because Steve Nash is one of my favorite all-time players, but I truly believe that Barkley can compete with just about anyone in the game. And for that reason, Phoenix Suns easily slide into A tier. The Portland Trail Blazers are the next team on our list, and a solid one at that with Clyde the Glide Drexler and Terry Porter. For Clyde, you basically just take Charles Barkley and flip his defensive and three-point stats, which allows him to match up with the majority of players in the game. As expected, the Glide is more than capable of bone-rattling dunks and broken rims. Terry Porter is a very good three-point shooter, but he doesn't really provide much outside of that. You're probably not choosing the Blazers to play with him anyway. Blazers are a solid team that can stomp much of the lesser competition of the game, but they're not quite at the level of the better teams, and just like B is for Blazers, B is also for B tier. Some of you youngins out there may not know that the Oklahoma City Thunder actually got their start in Seattle as the Supersonics. In fact, Kevin Durant played his rookie year as a Supersonic before the franchise moved to OKC for the start of his second season. But back in the early 90s, the Sonics had one of the NBA's most feared, ferocious, and violent dunkers in Shawn Kemp. If you don't manage to break a backboard playing with him, I don't know what to tell you. Kemp literally has dunks where he jumps off the screen. If Detlef Schrempf was anything more than a light post as a teammate, the Sonics would easily be an A-tier team due to Kemp's speed, defense, and power bombs. Alas, they'll have to settle for B tier. Kemp is one of the most fun players in the game. The Sacramento Kings may have been one of the worst teams in the NBA in the 93-94 season, but you wouldn't have guessed that playing with Mitch Redmond. He's a great three-point shooter, is the only other player outside of Isaiah Thomas with max speed, and what do you know, he's also got max dunking abilities. Mitch Redmond is an absolute machine, even if they did his hairline dirty. Wayman Tisdale doesn't really provide much of anything as a second option, but it hardly matters because playing with Redmond allows you to compete with any team in any matchup. I wouldn't hesitate to put them in S tier, but I just can't look past Mitch's mediocre defense and Tisdale's zero contribution, even if defense is overrated. As a result, the Kings end up in A tier. The The Dallas Mavericks with Jim Jackson and Derek, not to be confused with Ron Harper, are next. Both are very good defensively, but neither are very interesting dunkers. Jim Jackson can shoot threes with the best of them, but there's really not anything fun about breakaway finger rolls. The fact of the matter is, though, that the duo combined to be a fairly solid team, if you can deal with hardly any dunking. There's nothing too special, but also nothing too detrimental about playing with Dallas, and they certainly cleared the C-tier teams. Dallas Mavs are an easy B-tier. Last but not least, we have the Denver Nuggets, and if the game coded the athletes to be true to their size, the Nuggets would likely take the top spot as the tallest team, with 7'2" Dikembe Mutombo and 6'8" LaFonso Ellis. Naturally, both players' defensive stats are very good, and they're both great dunkers. However, you're really not going to get that much more out of them than that. They're both prone as ball handlers to turning it over, but if you want nothing more than a dunking experience, the Nuggets are a great team. I was initially tempted to put them in C tier, but when I look at the other teams there, I just don't think it would be fair considering both guys play great defense and can dunk the air out of the basketball. So with that being said, the Denver Nuggets will wrap up this tier list by adding one more to the many teams in B tier. Well, that will do it for this video. Before it ended, I just wanted to thank you again for watching and for all the support on the video. I really do appreciate it. If you're new or returning viewer and liked what you saw, consider subscribing and liking the video if you haven't already. It would mean a lot to me. A lot of work went into this, really enjoyed making it. Hope you guys enjoyed watching it. Leave a comment down below of something you might like to see next, or let me know what you think of my rankings. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Later.